Well, hello everyone, and I thought to start off our series on interviews with marketing researchers, I'd start with myself because I'm a full-time marketing researcher, and it would be good for you to get to hear some of the things that come up in my life without necessarily having to tie them all into a lecture. So here we go. How did I get into the field of marketing research is a good question to start with, and the answer is I got into the field of marketing research because I was a student who got really disillusioned with the idea of just being a marketer. And I should probably back up and explain. So, I had a lot of jobs in my 20s. I originally was a journalism student at the University of Illinois. Didn't make it through that program because I kind of got disillusioned with where journalism was going as a profession. And I spent some time working in retail, working in marketing, working in public relations, and things like that before I ultimately decided to go back to school. And as I was sitting in my first marketing class, intending to be a marketer, that was the emphasis that I had placed on my business curriculum. I really didn't like what I was hearing, and I actually had a great instructor. My instructor was Dr. Madhav Sehgal at SIUe. He is the founder and was the original program director of the MMR program. I didn't know that at the time. I just thought he was this guy who was sharing some ideas that I found rather outdated, having just been out in the working world. And I would challenge him. I would speak up in class and tell him I didn't agree with some of the things he was sharing, and I'd challenge his test questions. And he loved it. He loved the fact that a student was willing to speak up and to make him rethink the framework of what he was doing a little bit. And he encouraged me at the end of the class, if I really liked my marketing research class that I was going to take in the fall, to consider applying for his program. And so I did, and here I am. And I have to say that one of the things that really drove me to become a marketing researcher was that I wanted to understand, and the reason I really went back to school was I wanted to understand how marketers made decisions that would affect people like myself who were working on the front lines. When I was in retail, when I was in food service, other areas, there were all kinds of things that would be handed down from corporate, and they would tell us what kind of signs to put up, or what kind of promotions to offer, or how to interact with our customers. And I felt like a lot of times they didn't really understand the customer very well, and I was kind of wondering, like, is there some science behind this? Like, do they know something that I don't? And I really wanted to learn where this information was coming from that was causing them to disrupt our lives on the front lines so much because it seemed like they were never interested in hearing what we had to say. As I learned going through my coursework, a lot of people in the business world don't really understand their customers that well, and a lot of the decisions that get made are really reflective of just the fact that they have the authority to make those decisions and not that they actually know anything. And I thought, well, that's a raw deal. Marketing research seems like a much better place for me because I like to ask questions, I like to find answers, and I really appreciate the value of data and science. And so once I began the MMR program, I never looked back, and this has been a wonderful career field for me. I graduated from the SIUe program as an undergraduate in 2008, started the MMR program that fall, and then graduated from the MMR program in 2009. So I've been doing this for about 12 years now. And during that time, I've learned an awful lot of lessons. But the next question that I see on my list here is, so you really worked in comic books and video games. What the heck are you doing here? And the truth of the matter is, yes, in my 20s, I had a lot of jobs. And one of those jobs was I worked for a company that produced comic book adaptations of fantasy novels and science fiction novels. And at the time, we were working with a guy who most people didn't know. His name was George R. R. Martin. And of course, he's very famous now because of the Game of Thrones TV show. But at the time, he was just a novelist who he was getting very popular. But we adapted a story that they're now going to make into a TV show. It's called The Hedge Knight. And it was one of the best selling comics of that year. And I was the marketing director for that comic. So I got to learn a lot about going into a mature market and trying to sell things and trying to get the confidence of people that are on the front lines as independent resellers, selling through a distributor. And I learned a lot from the top down on how that whole process worked, and as well from the bottom up. And another aspect of my job was I was in charge of public relations, and so I had to do a lot of media coach, or a lot of media interviewing, a lot of media coaching, um, a lot of time just spent trying to understand how to get better press for what we were doing. And we were a runaway success with that particular comic, but we didn't actually make a lot of money because in the comic book world, you don't make a lot of money. And so we worked with, through that connection with George R. R. Martin, several other authors that had all published work in this anthology called Legends, and some of those included people like Orson Scott Card and Raymond E. Feist and Tad Williams and Robert Silverberg. And Stephen King, although we were not able to work with Stephen King directly, we talked to him. And we took several of those works and adapted them into graphic novels, and then we were able to extend that out into working on some of their other works as well. Some of the books that we produced weren't really well positioned to the market and didn't do so well. Others did really well. One that didn't actually come of that connection, but which came a little bit later, was we decided to try to target female audiences who might be interested in comics. And at the time, comics were still pretty male centric, and unless you were doing manga, the Japanese comics, you really weren't going to reach a lot of females. So we worked with an author named Laurel K. Hamilton on a series called Anita Blake Vampire Hunter. It was a very popular series of novels, which the early novels are fine. The later novels are almost pornographic. But we adapted the earlier novels, and actually my wife was the adapter on those. So my wife actually wound up being more famous in the comic book industry than I ever did, although neither of us are working in it now. I also worked in the video game industry both before and after that experience as a game reviewer, and my job as a reviewer and ultimately an editor of a website was to get games from publishers. They would send me free copies of them, and I would review them and write up my opinions about them. And at the time, I thought it was a pretty cool job. It was something I always wanted to do. It did not pay well. It mainly was great for the free games, but not much else. I was really interested in being in the video game industry, but I never wanted to learn how to code, and I didn't really have any connections. So I kind of lost interest in that industry in my early 20s. And then later on, I came back in the retail side of things. And I was working for a company called EB Games, which is now called GameStop. They acquired their largest rival, and they're the same company now. And I was a store manager for many years. And working on the retail side as a store manager, I'd had other retail jobs, but this was the first time that I'd had a real opportunity to understand the marketing promotion elements of running a store. And it was really a great transformative time for me in terms of my understanding of how the world of business works, and what it means to have a high margin product versus a low margin product, and what it means to attract customers. And I was really successful during that time. I was actually the top ranked manager in the entire Midwest for a year and a half, and almost 2 years in a row. I got beaten by one store ultimately that was the store of our regional manager. So, I kind of felt like if I was going to lose to anybody, it was going to be to them. But it was a great experience, and it also allowed me to leave on a high note. So when I went back to college, I didn't have to try to beat my record again. But what I learned during that time as well was that those kind of jobs, while they are fun and they're interesting, they don't pay very well, and you are at the mercy of other people a lot, and you have to put up with a lot of decisions that you don't like. And I'm really glad I did not remain with that company. They've been through a lot of volatility. I probably would not be there anymore. And in fact, many of the people that we hired on as managers came from the shoe industry because they had gone through an upheaval prior to us. And a lot of the people that got hired from the shoe industry wound up leaving and going on to other sides of retail after the upheaval started happening among closure of video game stores. So there you go. It's an interesting ride while it lasts. And one of the things that I recommend to anybody who wants to get into any field, but particularly marketing research, is it's good to have some jobs like that. I also was a McDonald's manager at one point, and that time taught me a lot, and it gave me a lot to draw upon, so that when I'm working with clients today, I can refer back to those experiences and talk about what I did and how that reflects some aspect of what we're talking about with their own service that they're offering to their customers. So there's some real opportunity to look at those jobs that you have that maybe aren't your career jobs, but are still experiences to draw upon in your later life. Some other things that I learned during that time was I developed some good skills with the web and learned how to create things for websites and things like that. I learned how to be very self-sufficient and try to be able to create a lot of things on my own, which benefited me in the business that I ultimately wound up getting into, because we're a small business and it's all hands on deck for everything we do. And I also had a publishing background, because I, not only in my journalism background, but also working with a comic book publisher, I learned a lot about layouts and producing things. And while I'm not going to say I have the best visual eye for things, what I will say is that I'm at least competent enough that I can put things together and then hand them off to a graphic artist if I want them done better. So some of those skills really do help me as a qualitative researcher today. But I think the skill that helped me the most was learning how to listen to people, and whether that was as a comic book marketer, as a retail store salesperson, even as a McDonald's manager who had to manage a drive-through and a front counter at the same time, learning how to listen to people and hear what they really wanted and to cut through all of the filler that comes in those encounters and to really help them with their problem helped me get a little bit more attuned to not only how people think and feel, but also how to help them solve their problems. And that's something that's really important in the work that I do today. So what do I do as a qualitative researcher, you might wonder? And the answer is I do everything. I design studies, I consult with clients to help them figure out what kind of methods they want to use. I conduct the research, often myself or with a team. And I do the design and analysis. Now, we do have teammates that help me out on these tasks. We have a professional stable of interviewers that work with us. We have analysts on staff that are able to help me, but I'm guiding a lot of this process. And when you consider the fact that as an MMR student in my internship, I was doing essentially the same job that I'm doing today, it's kind of scary. But the reality is that I took this internship with a small firm knowing that that was what I wanted. I was really impressed with the ability I would have as an intern to do everything. And here I am doing everything today. Um, when we're talking about research projects, a lot of times there is a quantitative component to some of the work that we do. And that's because a lot of the work that we do is for clients that want to have some ability to do benchmarking and they want to have some kind of numerical standard that they can compare from study to study. And so it's really important for us to be able to offer some quantitative data, even if the study is primarily qualitative. Other times we have to follow up a qual study with a quant study for validation. In fact, just last week, I did a series of in-depth interviews with consumers from all over the St. Louis area, and we're going to be following that up in the next couple of weeks with a quantitative study to validate what we learned in that concept testing that we did. So it's important to be able to utilize both skill sets, but I tend to prefer qual for a few reasons. One of them is that I find that the data are a lot better. They're a lot higher in quality, a lot easier to parse. They take a lot more time to deal with, but we've developed some good processes and systems to help us get through that. I do find that a lot of qualitative researchers, because they're academically trained, probably do more with the data than they need to, particularly in terms of how they're coding data. They want to take qualitative data and almost turn them into quantitative data. And there are some reasons for that. There are definitely times where that comes in handy. And we're going to talk about that in this class, of course, but there are also times where you need to be able to look at your data set in a transformed way, and it helps you to remove bias and it helps you to have a little bit more rigor. And I think that can be really useful, particularly in an academic setting. But the problem is that it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of interpretation that can introduce a lot of bias. So we try to strike a balance between what is good practice and what's useful to our clients. And the technique that we've developed, which is we use a categorization system that I designed on my own when I was an intern because we didn't have a system in place that we were formally using. The categorization system that we use is really useful because it allows clients to see the themes, it allows them to read the data, but it doesn't contribute too much interpretation. And that's important because a lot of times when we're interviewing in business to business, which is a lot of the work that we do, or when we're interviewing people who are very high context, the less interpretation that we put into the process, the more the client can get out of the research. But our job is to help them to parse that. So I often say that we're not just researchers, we're curators. We're people that come in and assemble these data and put them in a place and a package where the clients are able to do something with them. So in addition to doing all of that as a qualitative researcher, I have to keep on top of my skill set. I am a member of the QRCA, the Qualitative Research Consultants Association. I attend conferences when I can. I spend a lot of time trying to rethink our methods and improve them, keep them up to the 21st century. I've spent a considerable amount of time training on the Qualtrics platform because I believe it's the best platform out there for general purpose research, and we use it for qualitative, believe it or not. And I think it's really important to keep that skill set sharp. So the next question actually is, what does it take to be a good qualitative researcher? And I would say skills is definitely one of the things that it takes, but more than anything, I think having the skill of being a good listener is really important. So I don't know about you all, but my mind is easily distracted. I think a lot faster sometimes than I want to, and I'm jumping to conclusions and I'm jumping to next topics and things like that when I'm listening to people. And some people take a long time to express what they want to say. So I've had to train myself to slow down and to be engaged and to listen when I'm talking to people and to try to really hear what they're saying. And that sounds like an easy thing to do, but it's not. It takes a lot of time and a lot of trouble. And while it definitely benefits me in some areas of my life, like my marriage, as a qualitative researcher, where it benefits me a lot is that it enables me to focus less on the objective of what I'm trying to accomplish and more on just hearing and relating to someone as an individual and trying to get them to express the things that I'm looking to hear, but in a more personal way. And I found that if you're too regimented in qualitative research, that you often have trouble getting people to open up and talk because they feel like they're being pressured to perform. So I'd say being able to listen is probably one of the most important skills you can develop. Another skill that's really important to develop, though, is being able to understand how people are going to respond to the things that you're asking. And so, for example, a lot of researchers, when they write questions, they write them in a very scientific way or a very logical way, but they don't think about how people answer questions. And we get a lot of jargon that gets inserted, especially when business clients are involved. We get a lot of times where they have objectives that they want people to articulate these really clean and nice things, and people aren't going to articulate those things cleanly or nicely at all. And we have to understand as well where people are going to be confused, where they're going to tend to feel survey fatigue, where they're going to tend to cling to the midpoints because they're afraid to make a commitment. And so having that ability to empathize with people and understand how they respond to things is important to be a good qualitative researcher. We often get accused on the qualitative side of being too touchy-feely. And I'll own that. We many people who are drawn to qual are touchy-feely. A lot of people that are drawn to qual are people that would otherwise be social workers or social psychologists or things like that, and maybe have training in those fields. But the reason we're touchy-feely is because we think about people as individuals. We don't think about them in numerical terms the way a purely quantitative researcher might. And so we are responding to them. And you have to have that emotional intelligence, although I hate that term, but that's what you need in order to be successful at qual. So what are some fun stories that I have? I'm going to tell some of them in this class, of course, but just this week, we did for two different studies, a lot of virtual interviewing where we were talking to people in their homes. And one of the studies that I did was for a local children's hospital, and the other I did was for a company that is trying to sell video game controllers to consumers. And in both of those studies, it was fantastic just being able to see people in their own element and getting the chance to um, look into their lives through the video camera and see what was going on around them. And some of the people were obviously more professional and polished. They used Zoom like pros. Other people were sitting on their couches or their beds. Excuse the sirens there. We're near a fire department. And they were essentially giving us a window into the fact that they don't think a lot about being interviewed. They have to sit and reflect and try to understand things in a place where they're comfortable. It's not a professional exercise for them. It's something that's really requires them to have a level of comfort that they don't normally get when they're brought into a research facility or a more neutral or sterile type of research environment. So I really enjoyed it. I think one of the people we talked to, her smoke alarms were going off, and it was like that chirp that you get when you have a low battery. And we heard not one but two different alarms going off. She also got interrupted by her child at one point, but yet she had some really sharp points to make, and she was wonderful. We enjoyed her. There were other people that during that same interview that we could see. They had a little bit of a dependency on something. One guy, he was vaping for a while, and then I'm pretty sure I saw him spark up at one point. And we had other people that would have to interrupt to take big swigs of coffee or things like that. Just normal fun things that you get to observe about people. I've definitely interviewed some interesting characters during the time, and I think one of the things I'll refer to in the lectures was when I had to interview a very elderly man named who had the name of a wizard. I'm not going to say which one because I want to preserve his anonymity, but he had the name of a wizard. He was an old man, and his wife had died, and he was really sad about it. And I had to counsel him and coach him during the interview because he was crying through a lot of it. And the interview wasn't about anything related to his wife. He was just really sad and missed her. And what was really fascinating to me was in the back room, the client was annoyed. They wanted me to finish the interview and get him out of there because he wasn't telling them anything they wanted to know. And yet there I was in the room, feeling the utmost empathy for this poor man who he was just lonely and he needed somebody to talk to. And I know we weren't meant to be his therapy, but that was what we were for the day. So it was interesting. Um, Another thing that I thought was really fun was one study we got to do was out on the Del Mar Loop in St. Louis, and it was an intercept study where we had to interview people and ask them about what they thought about the loop. And while we were out there, PETA came out and did a demonstration where they had these girls in bikinis uh, with marker drawing all over them like cuts of meat. As out there to protest butchering animals for meat or something like that. And we were trying to compete with that, and it did not go well. Nobody wanted to take our survey while that was going on because it was so spectacular of a sight just to see what was going on there with PETA. You get to do some fun stuff like that as a qualitative researcher, and I think that's one of the things that I enjoy the most about the profession is that we're out among the people. We are not just sitting behind a desk dealing with data that came in from a panel that was hired that we never see or interact with. We really get to talk to people and really get to know them and hear their stories. And even though a lot of those stories and people fade away as time goes by, you still have folks that really stick out to you and who you really remember. Well, the final question is, what would you say to someone else who wants to become a qualitative researcher? And what I would ultimately say is that if you want to get into qualitative research, you're going to have to find an opportunity that may not be the easiest for you to start off with at the beginning of your career. I got lucky. I got into a research firm that did qualitative work. We never hired another intern through the MMR program. We haven't yet. I hope we will one day, but we just didn't have the funds to be able to do it. So I had a rare opportunity. There are other students I know that have gone into qual that had similar experiences. They got in somewhere, there was an opportunity, they took it, and they get to do it now. And hopefully you'll get to hear from some of them during these lecture interviews. But ultimately, looking for those opportunities is important. In the meantime, keeping your skill set sharp. Do some practice focus groups, do some practice interviews, do some community service work, work with not-for-profits, or work with other people that need this kind of data but can't necessarily afford it or who don't really have the sophistication to know what to do with it. It'll give you an opportunity to keep your skills sharp, to learn some things, and then, of course, stay connected and stay involved. Connect with me on LinkedIn or talk with other qualitative researchers through the QRCA or other groups. Find opportunities to meet people and get to know them who are doing this, and you'll ultimately find a way into this profession. One thing I will close with is I encourage all of you, if you're interested in being a qualitative researcher, definitely keep in touch with me because I'm really happy to help you find opportunities and to help you learn. But I love what I do. I hope that you will love what I do as we go through this class, and I hope you enjoyed this interview. Thank you.